indeed, long live the new flesh, as James Wood mentioned in that film, that iconic line from the movie Videodrome, also starring Debbie Harry, the David Cronenberg film, which sets the tone for the first hour of tonight's show, which is about cults, but more along the lines of death cults. What drives people to want to join them, and the Christian sense of sacrifice and self-murder in order to serve a delusion based on someone's need to live in their own real life sci-fi adventure rather than accept or become a man in the real world. You're listening to Thomas Sheridan on the Velocity of Now, and tonight is a pre-recorded show because I will be away researching for the next book, Valpurgis Night Volume 2. And if you want to check out my website, where you can actually buy a copy of Valpurgis Night Volume 1, which people tell me is a book they enjoyed very much and was a book that I very much enjoyed researching and writing for, you can visit my website called www.thomassheridanarts.com, or you can go to the video page for this show, where you can also get the audio downloads put to interesting surrealist films I try to make, slideshows, and that's at newsymbolsmedia.tv. So welcome again. It's a bit strange doing a pre-show in advance, but these are important things to talk about. Now, that Cronenberg film was very interesting. Videodrome film. It's even by modern standards in 2015, it's still pretty intense and difficult to watch. It essentially deals with a TV producer who's a slime bag, played by James Woods, who is looking for more and more, shall we say, salacious or hardcore content for his tacky television network. Through a series of encounters, and also involving himself with a hacker, a techie guy who's able to hack into foreign satellites, they find basically live snuff movies on a channel called Videodrome. And through a series of connections, and eventually it turns out that he's actually part of a cult, and he becomes... The film is a very, very good allegory for how people become involved in death cults, which is really what happens James Woods in this. There was some need at a very primal level to push the envelope. In the case of James Woods, it was his desire for sadomasochism and his relationship with Debbie Harry, which is completely freaky, and his need for going deeper into the sensationalism and darkness of the TV world as it was back then. This is before the internet. There was still subcultures. There was almost like, you know, what they have deep web today. Well, what I've heard about deep web, I don't even really know what it is, but it sounds like what deep web is. There was a video subculture of that broadcasting on scrambled satellite feeds around the world that would have all these things like Brazilian snuff movies and so on. And James Woods went into that world and found himself basically taken over by a cult. Well, it's the same thing when someone joins a flying saucer cult or an alien contactee cult or something like that. They have a sort of a sense of not only wanting to believe that there's something more beyond this reality, but also an inherent narcissism to believe that they're special enough to be contacted or special enough to be part of these kinds of collectives. Now, you will have an inner psychopathic circle within the cult who are generally, well, they'll be psychopathic / psychotic. Ultimately, it'll come down to one psychopathic leader within the cult who's very aware of what they're doing and will be the one doing things like having all the enablers live in the same compound together, intermarrying them off amongst each other. It was very common within these kind of family cults. One of the most infamous ones is a cult called the Family of God, which basically was a recruiting ground for sexually active teenage girls, so they could be lured into the cult, do flirty fishing, which means they would flirt with men on, like nerdy guys who couldn't get laid in real life could actually have a chance of scoring a girl like this. The Moonies used this technique as well, as did the Manson family. Now these guys will these kinds of family cult compounds, you'll have the initial interior psychopathic cult leader. There could be a parent, like a family thing, like you had similar in the Heaven's Gate cult, where there's almost like a father and mother archetype within that's because they're looking for people who don't have families, or they had a poor home family life, and they want these people to join in and believe they're in some kind of real life science fiction movie, while also in a family. So a lot of issues are resolved all in one go. Generally, the people brought into the family and the ones that are married off to the biological children of the cult leader are generally the most psychotic ones there, because they're even more fanatical than even the cult leader, because they truly believe it. They've also become psychotic because there's no other options left for them in life when they raise themselves up to that level of the cult. Remember, they're almost public now as part of an organization that, it probably gets its orders from aliens or whatever they talk to, spacemen, sky fairies, whatever you want to call them. And there's no way, say, after being in a cult that long, that if the cult fell apart, they could not go back into the real world and say, I want a job as this, that, and the other. Well, what did you do for the last 7 years? Well, I was living in a cult compound, and in somewhere and it could be anywhere, a cult compound in the West Indies, a cult compound in Australia, cult compound in Thailand. I wouldn't say cult compound, but I was with an organisation that talked to aliens, and even if they cover their past and they lied in their resume, it's not going to work, because what happens is people who are brainwashed in these cults, there's a certain personality vacuum about them. That's the way I would describe them. You can tell someone who's been in a cult, there's something not fully there. It's the lights are on, but nobody's home at a very kind of a deep level. This is why cult members don't get humor. They tend to be very serious. They definitely don't get satire. A cult member can't get satire, because they'd have to then admit to themselves that their own existence is the ultimate satire of all. There was a book by Dominic Stretfield called Brainwashing: The Secret History of Mind Control. Excellent book, by the way. And he talks about how young people who joined these cults, and the cult had dissolved, there's somehow the family got their relative back. They spoke about them as being changed. They were like apples that had been cored, and that's a very good way of describing this feeling we get when we encounter people who are in cults. Now, there's two kinds of cult member. There's one who's like an cult itself. There's one that's the sort of passive aggressive cult. These would be the ones who'd be kind of like very, almost extremely friendly, very helpful on the outside. We love you so much, and it's all about like kind of a hippie new age lovey-dovey kind of thing. And then there's the other kind of cult where there's a kind of a vicious hostility, tremendous arrogance, because these are the most dangerous cults of all. If you look at the Jonestown, it was filled with this kind of arrogance. And the Solar Temple in Switzerland and France, the one that led to the massive mass murder suicide, they were loaded with that same kind of arrogance. And of course the arrogance was taken to the extreme by the Process Church of the Final Judgment, who were behind the Son of Sam killings and many other things. They were even involved with Jimmy Savile, if you go back far enough, where Jimmy Savile was actually in their circle while the cult was starting out in London. But there's a viciousness there. There's you can talk the passive aggressive cults. If you walked up to them and said, well, you're full of crap, you're not, you're no way are you talking to this group from another universe or galaxy, and they'd go, they'd look at you like, I love you, and they'd kind of walk away. The vicious more death cult ones, if you said that to them, their instinct is to destroy you and kill you, because even though they've been cored and their personality has been removed, that vacuum, that hole, has been filled by the pathology of the psychopathic cult leader at the very top. So they're all, when the cult leader is having their sort of like psychopathic rages, screaming in a pool of their own effluent in the corner of a room because no one believes that they're, the son of God or something. That transfer of, a vicious, explosive rage and need for destruction and revenge is then poured into the hollow personalities of the immediate circle within the cult compound. The cult leaders in these sort of groups will generally seek out these kind of vicious, destructive types. They'll try and bring them in and use them for as long as they can use them and then dump them. Also, the immediate psychotic inner circle will have to develop this kind of vicious nature, embarking on smear campaigns, being thrilled by smear campaigns, following people around, screaming and shouting, and eyes trying really, it's really dark stuff, because they've no other option. This is it. It's this or the Kool-Aid mass suicide moment, which it's once, you see, this is what I always tell people. If you've entered into a cult, you're gone. It's over, okay? Because you're never going to be ever normal at some level ever again, because huge amounts of your personality have been dissipated and dissolved. You're like a magnet with no magnetism left. So they're all death cults. Carrying on further from the Videodrome idea, and this is what James Woods became in that movie. He became one of these psychotic, hate-filled destroyers, programmed killbots of the cult. And very similar to an extreme religious fanatic that would, just like what happened in Paris or in other places where you'd have religious fanatics like the ones who, the Shining Temple, I think they were called in Japan, who put the sarin gas in the subway. This is what they are. This is the final kind of stage they reach. But they're already there once they're like wildly in on the smear campaigns and things like that, because they've already been programmed to the killbot level. This is why you look at their photographs, and the eyes are just dead. They're so dead, they're almost like decomposing in their sockets. I've seen that with like Jehovah's Witnesses. I've seen that look. If you want to see the pathological viciousness element of it in action, there is a video on YouTube, I'll post the link on New Symbols Media, which shows 3 Scientologist managers, or whatever they call them in that cult, verbally assaulting and harassing a former member in an airport.
Works great, doesn't it? It makes you feel good. You can actually get your ethics in order. That would be the thing.
Stop committing suppressive acts. Full-time suppressive acts. Full-time. Just end it. Go live a life. Why don't you get a life, man? Just get a life. You've had 0 effect. None, and nobody gives a fuck about you. That's the truth. You're nothing. That's the point. You're nothing.
No comes cycle. Is that what you learned?
Why don't you just end it and start living a decent life and do something to help mankind, since you guys do nothing to help mankind?
That's it. You can see it right there. The woman is going, "You're such a suppressed person. You're a waste of space." And you have the other 2 wingnut knobheads with smirks on their faces, thinking that because they're getting messages from aliens or whatever, that they're smarter than everyone else. That's the whole thing. It's delusions times a million. Now, what kind of people join cults? Overwhelmingly, people who are formally educated in an academic sense. You will find more master's degrees and PhDs, particularly of the engineering and science fields within the cults. Marshall Applewhite of Heaven's Gate cult, when he was recruiting in the early days, until he had the initial family that he needed within their San Diego mansion before he killed them all to go on the Hale-Bopp Comet, he was recruiting at West Coast universities. You can see this in Jacques Vallée's book Messengers of Deception, that he went around basically like places like MIT, Stanford, UCLA, Caltech, Berkeley, and he would sit there talking to highly educated graduate students, people doing postgraduate degrees. I mean, these are the scientists of the future talking about how we're all going to be taken into space in a comet. At the end of the talk, you'd have 20 or 30 of them signing up to join the cult, of which, you might get one who'd be like a batshit crazy enough to actually stay. But this is the reason why highly educated people are more likely to end up in cults is, one, they think they're not going to end up and they're too smart to be like lured. Secondly, they have difficulty telling the difference between science fiction and reality. I mean, they live in this kind of... a lot of them probably wouldn't have had friends when they were growing up. So their family was Star Trek, it was Battlestar Galactica, it was the X-Files. This is why Marshall Applewhite, when he was recruiting people, there was one person who was desperately trying to recruit, and he didn't get it done. And the guy said to him, well, what TV shows are you into? And the guy says, I'm a big fan of both Star Trek and Star Wars. And Marshall Applewhite said, you're already halfway there. That's why when you look at these cults and read their message boards, the most crazed psychotics within them will use terms like, oh, the force is, there's a disturbance in the force, or this is because the first stage of their programming was sci-fi, because it was the only friend they had growing up, and so that's what Marshall Applewhite meant by saying you're already halfway there if you're a fan of these shows, because you've already predictably been programmed by as you know myself, I believe the whole alien things to begin with was a CIA psyop created, that's what Roswell was, by the former Nazis that were brought over from Operation Paperclip. So anyway, this is the kind of people who get in there. By the time you've reached a PhD level in formal education, you have been so mind controlled and so submissive to the authority that you have no ability to think for yourself anymore. And this is why cult leaders are standing in the universities waiting to replace the college professor that the guy who was studying, or the woman who was studying for a PhD, idolized. And then, because there's no independent thinking, they've been programmed up until master's and PhD level, do not think. And the cult leader knows this, and that's why they recruit these people. And it also gives a kind of a scientific grounding, if you want to use that, cachet to the cult's collective ideology, that somehow we're not really a cult because we have scientists, or we have scientific, validation of talking to the sky fairies or getting messages from the sky fairies. This adds to the delusion, but also adds to the pathology, because then it creates a us and them situation where you have, like in Scientology, the suppressed people and that kind of thing, or phaetons. All cults will use the same vernacular. They'll all have the same kind of general ideas. There's us and them, and don't be with them who make you doubt what the cult leader says, because they are disturbing the force in the field, and they're stopping you from reaching your full potential as whatever you're supposed to be, so you'll get on the spaceship, or whatever Christian salvation, rapture, re-engineering the cult leader has created for these knobheads. So they will become at one point there's a threshold moment where they have to look at their past life and say, am I willing to give all this up to throw myself into this they won't call it a cult, into this group or organization? And it depends on what their past life was, but generally you can tell the intelligent ones from the sort of like the easily led ones, what I call the sheeple 2.0. The intelligent ones will basically decide not to. Something inside them will tell them, this is not for me, it's something doesn't feel right. Where the more sort of like easily brainwashed, addictive personality types will jump right into the cult. This is why so many will be ex-alcoholics or chain smokers and things like that, because it's part of the addictive personality. There's a cure, and the cult leader will always have them with this one thing: if we get to this next level, then we'll have the answer, but that level is never reached. So the idea is to hold on to the addictive personality types. By then are also the ones who are so deep in it, then there's just no way back into society for them. Their personalities have been so completely and totally cored. Now, there are other kinds of cults as well that are not necessarily flying saucer, end-time death cults based on the Christian, concept of salvation, redemption, punishment, and guilt. But they do use similar ideas. I'll give you I'll give you an example of a technotronic cult. A good example of a technotronic cult would be Apple.
Apple is always about pushing the envelope, about doing the best thing possible. And that's different from any company industry.
There's no company in the world where there is such a reverence.
The reason you're here, the reason you were hired, is because you're at the top of your field, or you have the potential to be at the top of your field.
There's a belief in the power of small teams to do really great things. That if you get the right people in the room with this notion of let's just do something really great, then great things can happen.
One of the unique things about Apple is the level of cross-collaboration between different groups.
What you've brought to the table has contributed to something greater than yourself, and in that way, you're changing the world.
We're introducing mind-boggling new, gotta have it, scramble, lines around the building kind of products. And I love my role in making that happen.
There's a lot of places you can find happiness. Work, when structured right, is one of the few places you can really find meaning. And I think what Apple gives the employees is the opportunity to be part of something really, really meaningful.
People go to Apple and get the latest Apple iPhone. They'll, queue up or stand on line outside Apple stores. And this is the new flesh. You see, if you had iPhone, whatever the number is, I don't know, I have an Android, but if you have iPhone 6.1 or 6.0, and then Apple are bringing out iPhone 7.0, and you stand online desperate to get this, as we've all seen the videos on the TV, you're part of a cult, and what you're looking for is the new flesh, as Cronenberg called it in Videodrome.
Get the Videodrome! Long live the new flesh!
The new flesh is your discarding of your skin, your Apple 6.0 iPhone skin. It's interesting that they even call the wrappers around mobile phone skins. And then when you get your new 7.0 phone, you have assimilated to the new flesh.
Get the Videodrome! Long live the new flesh!
Death to the 6.0, long live the new flesh of the 7.0 iPhone. These are ideas of the technotronic cults. They're still in Apple. This is a marketer's dream, because the people who are behind this marketing know exactly what they're doing. You hear me talk in the last few weeks about Guinness beer. Guinness beer literally has a cult around it, and you see it the way they advertise it. The black stuff, Arthur's Day, even the slow motion of the head settling. It's all done in a very kind of a solemn kind of way, and their advertising always have these kind of like esoteric religious overtones.
We've travelled to nearly every corner of the earth, commissioned our own fleet of ships, and even built our own railway, because we believed in the beer we brewed, and we wanted everyone to taste it. Guinness has always been about beer and people. We have bonds with Irish farmers that span generations. Every day, we roast our own barley to a black state of perfection. And we're proud to say that many of us have entered these gates in the footsteps of our parents and our grandparents. We're only 255 years into a 9,000-year lease. We have a lot more beer to make.
If you can create that kind of brand loyalty where it's coupled with theocracy, as Apple and Guinness and some other companies I'm sure do it as well. What was the tagline that Carlsberg used? Believe it, or something like that. Same idea. You must be very careful about cults trying to infiltrate you, trying to get into your head. especially people in this scene. There are several websites, alternative news sites, that are grooming and recruiting grounds for death cults. Very sinister ones. Now, there's a reason for this. These cults were set up by the intelligence service to smash the alternative movement. This has been going on ever since basically what happened with the Nation of Islam. The United States government got the fright of their life when they saw the Nation of Islam develop, and how you had these young African American men, extremely articulate, were basically scooping up all the intelligent black men in America, and it was really working. They never wanted that to happen ever again, and that's why they flooded the colleges with cults. That's why the likes of Marshall Applewhite and his Heaven Gates cult, they would have been paid to go into the university and colleges. And I'm sure the process and other ones have, well, academics love the process, so yeah, definitely. And the Church of Set even would have had intelligence service set up, hence the arrogance again. And the ones today, what they do is they create these alternative news sites and on the internet for people in the awakened movement. And it was usually started off with a fund from the CIA who set them all up to begin with. And the idea is to take the real alternative media, the real dissident stuff, people who have real stories to share with the world, not just the alternative, that would disrupt the status quo of the psychopathic control grid. To take these people and spool them off into the land of woo-woo, into the land of flying saucers. So if there's a story about GMOs, it'll always come back to something about a message from aliens and all this kind of thing. And the idea is to cause disruption. That's why a lot of these kind of alternative news sites that are set up by the intelligence services, there's an awful lot of vindictiveness and nastiness. They're almost like hazing, a college hazing. Like, if you really want this information, you got to stand the abuse that we're going to give you. It's very much like that. It's a kind of an indoctrination into the Marines or something like that, but done with your consciousness in your mind. And that belief that, I'm allowing these people to abuse me because I asked a question. The real thing is that they want to get the ones who will allow themselves to be abused, because they're the ones that they'll create the most psychotic fanatic out of. This is what they want. And also there's people who say, I'll do anything to stop you from being nasty to me on your forum or on your website comments or whatever. And that's a big one too. So look out for these websites. There's a few of them out there, and they're run by very sinister individuals. And it should be interesting to see how much longer these sites last, especially with the anti-terrorism laws that are now sweeping in since the Paris attack. Another thing the psychopaths in charge used to shut down freedom of speech. I would reckon we're going to have a lot of these. We might have a lot of the Kool-Aid moments coming, especially as a lot of prophecies were made in the last few years that never happened, starting with 2012 and a few others. And a lot of people have drifted out of the alternative movement because of things like that. But other ones will stick around and be quite angry about it. And they're the ones we really want, the ones who will see through all the deceptions, not just the government and alien, the government and psychopathic control agenda, but also the alien stuff and the cults and all the other ones trying to spin them off into woo-woo land. I would suggest people watch that movie, Videodrome. It's definitely worth watching. It's not easy viewing. There's a particularly disgusting scene involving a needle and cigarette burns with Debbie Harry that is not pleasant viewing. I found myself completely unattracted to her. There's also very violent scenes of snuff and S&M stuff, but there's tremendous special effects as well. There's a scene where the guy puts a videotape into James Wood's body. You don't know if he's hallucinating or if it's really happening, if he's entered an altered reality, but he's been programmed. You see, the symbol of putting the cassette tape into him is programming him like a cult leader would program you. He puts the program into them. There's also some interesting symbolism as where I had difficulty decoding. Maybe someone out there smarter than me is better at this stuff. There was one scene where he goes into the TV station that he was one of the bosses of, and he murders the other bosses in there. He's been programmed now to with his new flesh idea, and he's running out of the back room of the TV station, and there's a very specific symbolism placed in there by Cronenberg of workmen moving glass doors and glass windows and one of them gets in the way for a second. I found that kind of interesting. I still haven't fully figured out the symbolism of that, but I'm sure it's a good one. I'm sure there's a Cronenberg buffs out there. He's a funny old director, Cronenberg. He deals with the kind of visceral things of life. So Long Live the New Flesh is something that exists in all aspects of life, and you gotta be very, very careful that if you do get new flesh, that it's your new flesh, your new consciousness, and your real path, and not something that's been programmed into you by another person. And now we go to the first song, which is, well, this is a beautiful song and very poignant, and it kind of goes with this. I've been discovering the genius of Porter Wagoner, the country and western genius, who has kind of never got on my radar screen. I didn't even know anything about him until about a year ago. And this is, listen to the lyrics of this song. This is $100 Funeral. Returning to the subject of debt cults again, and intelligence services created cults, doomsday cults that are based on grooming people for an end time scenario and a comet arriving, such as the Heaven's Gate cult, and other, re-engineered manifestations of the Christian idea of a day of judgment. The ones set up by the intelligence services are always placed in specific locations. In the United States, in Yonkers, just north of New York City, was a major place for cults created and placed into action for all kinds of social engineering reasons, and intelligence data gathering operatives locating them, and also basically they're a good way to hide and move intelligence services and plans and operatives into certain underground alternative movements. Yonkers was ideal in upstate New York because it was just outside the New York City limits, and that provided it as a out of sight, out of mind of the New York City Police Department, but still able to cause havoc and infiltrate and move and recruit within inside New York City itself. And north of that, up along the Hudson Valley, people will be quite surprised that there's quite a lot of wilderness up there. So there's always the factor of wilderness nearby, government buildings nearby, and agencies nearby are accessible somehow, and also wilderness. You need all three basically for these cults to operate and carry out their intelligence service. It's only the cult leaders who know that they're working for the intelligence services. Even the cult leaders' children wouldn't know it, and the people that were in the close family compound area wouldn't know it either. The another place would be in the United States would be there's a really dead highway, I-40, that cuts across between 29 Palms in California and Albuquerque in New Mexico, and it goes through a deserted town in Amboy, California. It's right at the bottom of Death Valley, and it's as far from anywhere you can get in the United States, and it's completely saturated with the worst kind of cults. Now there's also military and not far away. Also LA is not far away, Hollywood, and so you have all that, the access to that. That's on Route I-40 in Amboy, California. It's not a place you should drive through. It's not a place you should stop or get lost. You certainly don't want to break down there in the middle of nowhere. You'll never be heard of ever again, and that's a major center for intelligence services created cults and what they get up to, as well as the south of France. The whole south of France, basically from the Pyrenees across to the Swiss border, that's a big one for cults. And you would have, again, they're all there. The Raelians, the Melchizedeks, the Solar Temple were all over that area, right across the south of France. In England, you have Sussex in the south of England, between London and Brighton, and again, everything is there, and it's surprising that people would be very surprised that as close as that is to London, it has vast, empty, forested areas. I've been in them myself. In fact, I made a movie in one of them a few years ago. I was in a movie in one of them a good few years ago now, that was filmed in one of those forests, and it was I can tell you, those places, you'd be amazed that you were that close to London because it's so wilderness. a friend of mine called Paddy, who in one of these groups where he got involved in the wrong side of them, he ended up having to come to Ireland to show us how dangerous they are, and he was down that way. And I spoke to him the other night about he lives near Galway City, and I spoke to him the other night about his experiences and the basic cultified idea of a region, and in this case Sussex in the south of England. You said that you lived at the centre of a very cult place in Sussex in England, which I know all about myself, actually. Just tell me the story. You would just tell me about the Scientologists buying the bank where the last witch was burnt.
Well, I'm not actually sure it was quite exactly the Scientologists, but I know that there's it was definitely a culty area, and up at Witch Cross, which happens to be 666 feet above sea level. You'd have to check that to be sure, but I was told it was 660 feet. There was an old convent priory there, and basically the church was, it fell into disuse, and it was bought up by the bank. And then the bank used to use it as, all the way down to the altar, they had all their computers all lined up in there, and this would have been in the late 80s.
Right.
And obviously...
So it was a data centre for a bank?
The bank bought it. It was a data centre, and I think that they moved after that. They were there for a certain length of time. I don't think they're there anymore. I'm not sure. But but basically they ripped everything out, and they had it all filled up with computers in there, all up through the sort of the home.
Oh, that's interesting. So you had this hill where the last witch in England was burnt at the stake, and you think it may be 660 feet above sea level. We'll check that out. But even that's a great story. But even though it's not true, they're important stories because they had to. But now it's a bank data center. Yes. So it's almost like that's so creepy all in itself. It's like
by the church. Interesting.
Yeah. But what has that got to do with the cult?
What's that got to do with the cult? Well, I mean, basically, that particular area has all the cults. You had Steiner, Scientology, the Mormons, Rosicrucians. They all have these massive kind of, estate places.
Why do you think they were drawn down there?
That's a good question.
Well, there's that part of England, from what I know about, I've been there quite a few times myself. It's a big place for the retired top civil servants, all the generals from the army, right down. We're talking about like Lewis area, that area.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So all the top, like Whitehall, MI5, all that bunch are all down that part of England.
Yeah, they're all down there. Crowley.
Crowley's was down in Hastings.
And there were other people living in that area as well, which are, obviously Churchill. Everybody knows about Churchill was living down there.
And they have the annual burning. It's the only at Lewis they burn the Pope.
They do burn the Pope down there.
And also down that area, didn't Guy Fawkes go down there to actually get? I think there was a place called Battle to get the dynamite to blow up. And he was a Jesuit, so it's like a long history, yeah.
Oh my God! Yeah, that's a long history. Absolutely. Well, it's more so, and for rock musicians, loads of rock musicians living in that area down there. Bad Company.
Nick Cave lives down that way.
Yeah. God, I mean, I had to rattle my brains here. There's just so many people in that area.
You grew up there as a kid, right? Did you grow up with any kind of weird stories of any old mansions or anything like that?
Always witchcraft. There was always witchcraft mentioned. There was always this kind of underlying knowledge of something going on, which was kind of to do with Satanism.
And again, there was all the top civil servants, the MI5 people, the generals in the military, British politicians, the top judges, all retired down that way. Because if you take the train from London down to Brighton, you're struck by the people getting on the train. It's serious money.
Oh, completely. It's a different world. It's just the
old money.
Yeah, it's the back garden of London. It's where it really is. Everything is perfectly manicured. Can't complain. Really.
And it's very beautiful, but it's also incredibly expensive to keep the riffraff out. The old thing is it's like these islands off the coast of New England, like, Nantucket and Martha's Vineyard. All the wealthy go there, and Block Island and Fire Island off New York. That's out of sight, out of mind. They keep the real estate really high, and that way the elites can go about their shenanigans in their cults.
Virginia Woolf. I think she lived down there. Yeah, she lived very near me. And, there's just, the list is endless. That Philby's solicitor, a lawyer, QC, he lived down there as well.
The Cambridge Five guys, the KGB spy ring on the Victor Rothschild.
Yeah, he lived down there. And fascinating Eurythmic performance at Michael Hall that reminded me of the Genesis live album with people dressed up in really exotic coloured costumes carrying out what looked like a mass to me rather than a kind of an art performance. It was like a mass.
Like when Peter Gabriel had those boxes,
his heads on.
That kind of thing.
Oh, it's completely, absolutely. And I think that's probably where the Rosicrucians would be.
Well, the blockhead thing comes from an idea of hammering society into conformity, because that's a kind of a code among the mystery schools and the Freemasons. If you look at, there's an infamous EU poster from the early 80s that shows all the Europeans going into the Tower of Babel and been hammered into blockheads, just like the Peter Gabriel costume. I'm telling you, they have us by the balls on so many levels. It's not till you step away, like you're over here in Arno, you step away from it, and then you see it yourself. You know, that's how bizarre these people are. Like, I remember when it wasn't until I left Wall Street and was far away from it that I started to think about the kind of individuals I'd met. It was the same kind of thing. The weirdness and the strangeness of them started to hit you.
Yes, definitely very weird, but that kind of permeates throughout that whole area. There's something sort of over and above it, or whether it's generated by the cults of people that are there, or whether it exists naturally. I don't know. It could easily be a nature force in some way, because it's extremely wooded. There's a lot of natural environment there, and things are.
The woods down there are fantastic.
Oh, absolutely fantastic, and they're all actually looked after. I mean, regardless of all of the wealth, and anybody says, "Oh, there's this and that," that they actually do look after their estates extremely well.
Was there any serial killer kind of things going on when you were a kid down that way?
Lord Lucan.
Oh yeah, Lord Lucan. Do you want to explain to people who Lord Lucan was? I know, but
Lord Lucan. Well, he was a member of the royal family, and he basically disappeared. But the last place he ended up at was a place in Uckfield, at the Maxwell Scott's house.
But this was following the murder of a girl that he was involved with, a maid or something, right?
That you know more than me about that. I just know because
there was some shenanigans about a murder that he was a suspect in. He was the last time anyone had positively identified him was somewhere out in the Australian outback. He was protected by the royal family apparently, and went on to live a healthy life even after there was a murder involved or something. He was there was always that joke that Christy Morse said that Lord Lucan was seen riding away on Shergar. Remember the horse that went missing? I'm sick and tired of trying to go for a quiet pint in Irish pubs and all these gigantic screens and all these Irish plastic football supporters all sitting there getting all emotional, and the worst ones of all are of course the Man United Irish supporters. They're completely obnoxious, and the Liverpool ones as well, but the Man United ones, I don't know what it is, it's just something particularly obnoxious about them. I reckon a good way to take the piss out of them would be the next time they're playing in a big game would be to go into a pub dressed like an American sports fan, you know, like you see on American TV when they show the Super Bowl, and the guys have like football helmets with beer cans on them, and they're topless and they're painted in the colours of the team, and they're really animated and they're really over the top, and it comes across as completely insincere that they're not really fans. They just want to be seen as fans. And I think the Man United, well, all the soccer supporters in Ireland who support Irish clubs, or British clubs, not Irish clubs, the ones who support the Irish clubs are the real fans, but the ones who support like all the British clubs like Celtic and Man United and Liverpool and Tranmere Rovers, Colchester, whatever, you know, they pour their emotions into on the TV, they're the same thing. So I reckon a really good way to take the piss out of them would be to go into a pub when a Man U game is playing and show them a reflection of what they really are, and it might go something like this. Wow! Dude, in your
Did you see that? Whoa, man! How that play worked, man! Jesus! A long hurl thrown to the offensive end was picked up by the rookie. He took it down 3 conversion passes into the infield defense zone. And then you had a violation. Outfield lost. Oh my God! Then the corner violation flag. Curl kick into the Rooney. God damn it, Rooney in your face, man! Rooney! And then Rooney makes the skull conversion into the scoreback. 1-U! Man, one net, man! In your face, Poon! In your goddamn face! Yeah! Woo! Woo! Man! Oh, man! I knew that Rooney was going to be the Hall of Famer, man, when he played for Evertonian varsity, man. I knew it, man. Look, he's going to be as big as Jackson Johnson, man. 1973, 23 scoreback conversions in one goddamn season, including 4 against Preston North End in the 5 Bowl, man. We're going all the way, man. We're going to the 5 Bowl. The 5 Bowl, man.
Chose different times, though.
Woo!
Chose Berbatov instead of Tevez. Yeah. Tevez has been a raging...
Hey, dudes, where y'all going?
He's gone on to...
Back. We got to watch the post-game analysis of Sky, man.
That choice. Very costly.
Don't go, God, dudes, come back, come on!
I think he's done it.
Dudes!
I think all men
man, woo!
I remember a few years ago, it was Jan.
Oh, where the hell going, man? I want to watch the new Carlsberg commercial. The preview if they're going to show at the Fab Bowl. Man, dudes. Mary, can you set me up with some buffalo wings, dude?
Would you ever fuck off, EJ? Last young player since John O'Shea. And that's 10 years ago.
In other news this week, what has been the worst kept secret in my lifetime has been officially more or less sanctioned in the mainstream media at last. This story had been knocking around for years in all kinds of alternative media as rumours and a conspiracy theory, like so many conspiracy theories. It's come true. It comes 3 years later when all the smug types are all long dead and don't have to be embarrassed by the fact that they don't have minds of their own. This story is from the Sunday 25th edition of the Telegraph. French bread spiked with LSD in CIA experiment. A 50-year-old mystery over the cursed bread upon Saint-Esprit, which left residents suffering hallucinations, has been solved after Roy discovered the US had spiked the bread with LSD as part of an experiment. In 1951, a quiet, picturesque village in southern France was suddenly and mysteriously struck down. With mass insanity and hallucinations, at least 5 people died, dozens were interned in asylums, and hundreds afflicted. For decades, it was assumed that the local bread had been unwittingly poisoned with a psychedelic mould. Now, however, an American investigative journalist has uncovered evidence suggesting that the CIA peppered local food with the hallucinogenic drug LSD as part of a mind control experiment at the height of the Cold War. Isn't that just wonderful of them? The mystery of Le Pain Mondu, the cursed bread, still haunts the inhabitants of Point Saint-Esprit in the Gard, southeast France, right in the heart of the intelligence services cult heartland, stretching all the way from the Pyrenees to the Swiss border. And this has always been used by the intelligence services and the military to base their cults there. And this is one more example of this part of the south of France being used by the intelligence services for their no-goodniks. On August 16, 1951, the inhabitants were suddenly racked with frightful hallucinations of terrifying beasts on fire. One man tried to drown himself, screaming that his belly was being eaten by snakes. An 11-year-old tried to strangle his grandmother. Imagine that, they put it in the bread so even kids got it. Another man shouted, "I'm a plane!" before jumping off the second floor window, breaking his legs. He then got up and carried on for 50 yards. Another saw his heart escaping through his feet and begged a doctor to put it back. Many were taken to the local asylum in straitjackets. Time magazine wrote at the time, among the stricken, delirium rose patients trashed wildly on their beds, screaming that red flowers were blossoming from their bodies, that their heads had turned into molten lead. Eventually, it was determined that the best-known local baker had unwittingly contaminated his flour with ergot, a hallucinogenic mold that infects rye grain. Another theory was the bread had been poisoned with organic mercury. However, H.P. Albernelli Jr., an investigative journalist, claims that the outbreak resulted from a covert experiment directed by the CIA and the U.S. Army's top-secret Special Operations Division at Fort Derrick in Maryland. The scientists who produced both alternative explanations, he writes, worked for the Swiss-based Sandoz Pharmaceutical Company, which was then secretly supplying both the U.S. Army and CIA with LSD. Mr. Alberelli came across CIA documents while investigating the suspicious suicide of Frank Olson. Interesting story if you haven't looked up on that one. A biochemist working for the SOD who fell from the 13th floor window 2 years after the Kurzpress incident. He was actually thrown out the window by two members of the CIA. One noted transcriber transcribes a conversation between a CIA agent and a Sandoz official who mentions that the secret of Pont Saint-Esprit and explains that it was not at all caused by mold, but by the D in LSD. While compiling his book A Terrible Mistake, The Murder of Frank Olson and the CIA's Secret Cold War Experiments, Mr. Albarelli spoke to former colleagues of Mr. Olson, two of whom told that the Pont Saint-Esprit incident was part of a mind control experiment run by the CIA and the US Army. After the Korean War, the Americans launched a vast research program into the mental manipulation of prisoners and enemy troops. Scientists at Fort Derrick told him that the agents had sprayed LSD into the air and also contaminated local food products. Let me repeat this line again. Scientists at Fort Derrick told the agents that they had sprayed LSD into the air and also contaminated local food products. Now, I don't know much about the chemtrails thing, but I do know enough about not to make fun of people who are interested in the matter, because they're completely justified in not trusting governments. And for the ones who go, it's just conspiracy theory, oh, you retards, you really think that the governments would spray people with chemicals? Are you insane, you paranoid fruitcake? Ha ha ha! Well, you remind them that LSD was sprayed into the air above a French town back in 1951 and caused chaos. Mr. Alberelli said the real smoking gun was a White House document sent to members of the Rockefeller Commission, formed in 1975 to investigate CIA abuses, which they were probably behind them. The reason why the Rockefeller Commission investigated the MK Ultra and the other CIA abuses was because the Rockefeller Foundation were trying to find out the paper trail connecting them to the human rights abuses caused by the CIA. And what better way to do that than to set up an official investigative commission so they can whitewash their family's name out of this mess. It contained the names of a number of French nationals who had been secretly employed by the CIA and made direct reference to the Pont Saint-Esprit incident. In its quest to research LSD as an offensive weapon, Mr. Albarelli claims the US Army also drugged over 5,700 unwitting American servicemen between 1953 and 1965, and the vast majority of them would have been African American men. None of his sources would indicate whether the French Secret Services were aware of the alleged operations. According to US news reports, French intelligence chiefs had demanded the CIA explain itself following the book's revelations. French intelligence officially denies this. Locals in Pont Saint-Esprit still want to know why they were hit by such an apocalyptic scenes. At the time, people bought up the theory of an experiment aimed at controlling a popular revolt, said Charles Grandillon, 71. I almost kicked the bucket, he told the French magazine Les Ineructables. I'd like to know why. And there you have it. They think nothing of spraying us with chemicals. We're just animals to them. And this is why conspiracy theory exists, because it has happened in the past, and anyone who says, well, they wouldn't do it these days, are morons. And like all the other stories on tonight's and all the other shows, you will find this and the YouTube links to these hours of the Velocity of Now on newsymbolsmedia.tv. And now we're going to have one last song before we go into the second hour of the show, and this is Magic Man by Heart. And welcome back to the second hour of The Velocity of Now with me, your host, Thomas Sheridan. You can go on my website, www.thomassheridanarts.com. You can buy a book if you want there. You can go look at my blog. That's where most of the articles on the site are updated and are updated. There's occasionally I'll update articles on the main site, but most of the writing I do is on the blog, and you'll see a little tab on the upper right hand side of the page that will get you to that. Also go to newsymbolsmedia.tv for the video links to YouTube for this show and all the other shows, as well as all the articles relating to the topics discussed on the programs on the night. Last week I was talking about the idea of just putting it out there of catalytic exteriorization phenomena, as Carl Jung called it, where forces of intense psychic energy, generally brought about by stress and other things, but generally it's stress, can literally move objects in a room or anything. The force is incredible. It's something I believe in myself because I've witnessed it firsthand in a couple of people. It's one of the great mysteries of the mind, that when people become so upset that they can have this heating sensation in their diaphragm, and they literally become like a massive battery of electric power, and then that electric power is discharged. It makes you wonder about all these sports events like the Super Bowl and everything, and everyone has to watch the Super Bowl halftime show or the opening of the Olympics, if it's harvesting enormous amounts of emotional energy directed by the people watching it. A story came to my attention basically along the similar lines about something called what was called electric people. In 1846, when Angélique Cotin of La Perrière, France, was 14, practical control of electricity was still some 30 years in the future. They knew what electricity was, they just couldn't harness it. They hadn't come up with the ability to actually control electricity effectively. Thus, the sudden appearance of what seemed to be an uncontrollable electrical energy in the girl was both mystifying and terrifying. For 10 weeks in all, Cotin appeared to be charged, is the term they used at the time. Her touch sent heavy furniture flying across the room. Those around her could not grasp any object she held, and in her presence compasses danced madly. This shows a massive electromagnetic field around the body. Sometimes the young girl, it's always a young girl in a lot of these cases, sometimes the young girl's powerful seizures brought her to the edge of convulsions, and she often ran away at the first indication of an attack. Cotin, whose case was reported on by the French physicist François Arago, was one of a handful of historical figures known as electrical people, or electric people, victims of something called high voltage syndrome, it was known back then, a condition that may be related to the alleged psychokinetic powers of certain subjects now being studied in the United States, and what was being studied for many years, and it's probably still going on this has been studied at the highest levels of the military, by the way, in the Soviet Union, and it happens in the UK too also. Joni Mitchell, no relation, and Robert of the singer, and Robert J.M. Rickard collected a number of these cases in a book called Phenomena. One concerned Jeannie Morgan, Missouri. Sparks allegedly flew from the girls to nearby heavy objects. A handshake with this late 1970 teenager, it's a girl again, was reportedly enough to cause, in certain cases, unconsciousness. The authors also mentioned the case of Caroline Clare of Canada, reported by the Ontario Medical Association, again a girl. According to the investigation, her affliction included acute magnetism of the body. Knives and forks clung to her skin. Lewis Hamburger, whose case, again, as a boy this time, Lewis Hamburger, whose case was studied by the Maryland College of Pharmacy, suffered similarly from magnetization, while whatever Frank McKinstry's of Joplin, Missouri, was so careless as to stop in his tracks while charged, so the story went, his feet would stick to the earth, and strangers had to pry them loose before he could move again. It has long been known, of course, that humans do generate electricity. Tiny electrical charges help move signals from one cell to the next in the brain, and these can be measured electrical impulses using modern machinery, and for a long time too, were common tools for various kinds of activity in the brain. Today it's the fMRI. Previously that was the CAT scan. The electroencephalograph, I think, was the really early one they had. Massive electric shocks to the brain in the form of electroshock therapy are still used, unfortunately, as treatment in cases including severe mental depression, although the technique is not yet fully understood. Near fatal accidental doses of electric shock as well have produced some remarkably beneficial effects. In 1906, for example, the French astronomer Camille Flammarion reported on a paralysed man who, after being struck by lightning, gradually and permanently recovered the use of his limbs. A weakness of the right eye also disappeared, and the invalid, as they called them back then, could write without spectacles. On the other hand, he became deaf. Well, you give a little, you take a little. What do they say? The Lord gives it one hand and takes away with the other. In another of Flammarion's cases, a woman who'd been paralysed for 38 years recovered the use of her legs after a stroke of lightning. See, we know so little about the human body. We really do. We don't know enough to actually say it's this, that and the other. And there's so many mysteries to the mind, and the electrical power of the mind in particular. We tend to lose sight of the fact that strange things and weird happenstances take place outside the main English-speaking world. By that, we obviously mean the United States and the UK. Odd things and strange stories exist everywhere, and so do political and social and cultural mysteries. And this one I recently discovered was one I'd never heard of before, but it is truly an intriguing story. And it's a story of what happened to the Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt when he went missing in 1967. I found this essay written by someone called Cathal Coyle, and I want to read it to you because it's truly a fascinating story and definitely one worthy of further investigation. One of the more mysterious stories involving senior political figure occurred when the Australian Prime Minister Harold Holt went missing in December 1967. He had been in office from the 26th of January 1966 to the 19th of December 1967, when he was officially pronounced dead after it was claimed that he drowned at sea. That was the official line. But there were plenty of bizarre conspiracy theories, and some were not so quite inventive. One claimed that Holt was eaten by a shark, but others ranged from assassination attempts by secret agents from the Soviet Union, or that he was picked up by a Chinese submarine. Inevitably, given the era, another mentioned UFO involvement. Now, this is what got me interested, because when they start throwing in the UFO stories, alien abduction stories with these kinds of things, you know that something fishy has gone down, because the intelligence services create these UFO conspiracies in order to throw the serious study into these cases into chaos and to ridicule them. Harold Edward Holt was born in Sydney in 1908 and was elected to the seat of Fawkner in 1935. He became Australia's youngest Prime Minister in 1939 when Prime Minister Robert Menzies allocated him a junior role. He became Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Party on the retirement of Menzies in January 1966. After spending 32 years in Parliament, Holt's term as Prime Minister was characterised by strong support for United States involvement in the Vietnam War and a stunning 1966 election win on a pro-Vietnam platform. However, his tenure as Prime Minister was very short. He had been Prime Minister for only 22 months when he went for that swim on that fateful day in December 1967. Holt went with a few friends to Cheverot Beach near Melbourne, as he had done on numerous other weekends. It was one of the favourite places to relax, to swim and to spearfish. Although the waters were extremely rough, it didn't deter Holt from going into the ocean for a swim. At first his friends could see him swimming, but as the waves grew more ferocious, they soon realised that he was in trouble. Shouting at him to come back, the waves kept him away from the shore. However, after getting into further trouble in the rough surf, Holt disappeared among the waves and was never seen again. A huge search and rescue operation was immediately undertaken involving the Royal Australian Navy and Air Force, and despite what ultimately became one of the largest search operations in Australia's history, lasting for 22 days, no trace of Harold Holt was ever found. Although conspiracy theories still abound surrounding Holt's death, the most likely cause of his death was terrible sea conditions. You see, this is why conspiracies come about. It's very difficult to dispose of a body at sea. Very difficult. And a shark won't eat a dead body. It has to be a moving body. The sea always gives up its secrets. The sea always gives up its dead, especially that close to land. Quite possibly his body was eaten by sharks. Not possible. But it's just as likely that the extreme undertow took his body out the sea. There was profound international reaction to the disappearance of Holt. They included condolences messages from many world leaders, with dignitaries such as United States President Lyndon Johnson and British Prime Minister Harold Wilson attending the Melbourne Memorial Service. Holt was the third Australian Prime Minister to die in office, but is best remembered from the unusual circumstances surrounding his death. Without determining the cause of Holt's death, a joint report by Commonwealth and Victoria Police submitted in January 1968 concluded that there has been no indication that the disappearance of the late Mr. Holt was anything other than accidental. The explanations put forward for the failure to find the body included an attack by marine life, the body being carried out to sea by tides, or becoming wedged in rock crevices. The police departments also relayed that Holt was apparently suffering from a shoulder injury that had nearly caused him to drown just 7 months earlier. Holt had also suffered from some kind of collapse during Parliament that same year, later blaming it on a vitamin deficiency for the episode. And see, that's the one that really sets my alarm bells off, this collapse during Parliament. And whilst a variety of theories were suggested about Holt's disappearance, the Australian government did not deem a formal inquiry necessary. And there you go, accepting that the conclusion of the police report. The official conclusions weren't accepted by many people, not surprisingly, because when you have something as serious as a sitting Prime Minister or head of state dying in an accident, you cannot just leave it to the local police forces to investigate it. It has to be a full inquiry at the highest levels. One of the first to come forward with an alternative theory about Holt was a Swami in India who had heard Holt's death and apparently had a vision showing him where Holt's body was buried in the sand and on the sea floor. That was also a psyop, I would say. During the 1960s, the CIA and the intelligence services were using all these Indian gurus as basically... You had to believe them. They were being held up the same way that the Dalai Lama is being held up today as someone you have to believe. Back in the 60s, just like the Beatles and everything, they were, that would stop the young people from questioning, the Beatles have a guru, therefore this guru says this about Holt, it must be true. It also ridicules it as well, and also it puts the idea in people's head that he's at the bottom of the sea. A series of correspondences were exchanged between the Australian High Commission and an Indian Parliament member who represented the Swami, but this didn't lead to any retrieval of Harold Holt's body. One of the more... You see, the body wouldn't sink. I mean, it doesn't sink. I've read enough books on the mafia and things like that. When they bury a body at sea, I mean, they literally have to mutilate it. It's called taking the air out of it. You have to literally... remove most of the internal organs and not just the stomach and the lungs, because of the way seawater reacts with these internal organs. It creates buoyancy. One of the more colourful claims is made by British journalist Anthony Gray, who in the 1983 book The Prime Minister Was a Spy made the assertion that Holt had been an operative of the People's Republic of China. Gray alleged that Holt's disappearance was all part of an operation to return to China, and insisted that his body was never found because he was picked up very much alive by a Chinese submarine. Who or what to believe? The strange case of Prime Minister Holt is yet another unanswered mystery of the 20th century involving a world leader. It's definitely one that I will be looking further into, and I think other people should as well. If you have any insights into this story, if you live in Australia, you can go to newsymbolsmedia.tv and add your little comment there. In corporate fascism news this week, Hershey's company, who don't make chocolate, they make a kind of a brown candle wax in a brown wrapper with a silver foil. Well, they've stopped Cadbury's and other products from being imported into the United States because they claim the packaging on these items resembles too closely some of their US products. It's really not about that. This is a classic example of corporatism again. The whole idea is for corporatism is basically Marxism, communism in terms of products. So Hershey's just wants to keep their brown candle wax as the main quote-unquote chocolate in America. American chocolate sucks to high heaven. It really does. I just don't understand how the US cannot make chocolate properly. You get other things like ice cream, beautifully, baked goods, wonderful, cheesecake, all that stuff, but for some reason Americans cannot make chocolate. I don't know if it's the type of feed that they use in the dairy cows that produces a very kind of a low-grade, low-fat milk. I don't know what it is. The chocolate in America is truly atrocious, and the only place you can get good chocolate in the US is imported chocolate. So this thing that Hershey's have done is really nasty. It's a real nasty business. And there's a quote here from their representative, a guy called Jeff Beckman. It is important for Hershey's to protect its trademark rights and to prevent consumers from being confused or misled when they see a product name or a product packaging that is confusingly similar to a Hershey's name or trademark, Beckman told the New York Times. This makes no sense at all. People are not that stupid. What this is really about is that they're annoyed that Hershey's sales are being damaged because more and more Americans are finally discovering what chocolate is supposed to taste like. Hershey's never took off in Europe because it was garbage, and at the end of World War II, Hershey's have always been a sinister company. After World War II, when World War II was happening, they gave American troops boxes of Hershey's bars to keep in their tanks. So, and then they were told to destroy or attack European chocolate companies. This is why Swiss chocolate became the big chocolate in Europe after the war, because they were actually bombing and attacking German and other chocolate companies in Europe, and so they would get the American troops would give free bars of Hershey's over to German civilians, but the Germans wouldn't eat that. They knew what chocolate was. They wouldn't touch that garbage, and so it never took off. It just didn't. And also remember 3 Mile Island, that was out at Harrisburg in Pennsylvania. That's the heart of Hershey land. That milk was all contaminated by the radiation that leaked out of that plant, and probably still does. And Hershey's to this day hides behind armies of lawyers like they always do. I imagine if you put a Geiger counter to a Hershey bar made in Pennsylvania, it would probably light the thing up. And Hershey's, it's just horrible. I mean, it's just, anyone who's tasted a Hershey's chocolate and then had real chocolate knows the difference. It's appalling. And so this is just corporatism, old-fashioned corporatism 101, the kind of the Marxist approach to having a business, our way or the highway, and nothing else. Now, Cadbury's isn't my favourite chocolate at all. I haven't eaten Cadbury's in years. I don't really like Cadbury's. I do like the Whisper bar. That's the only thing I do like. But the chocolate itself is nothing to write home about. The best British chocolate by a mile is Galaxy. Galaxy is a beautiful chocolate. It's the chocolate I think they use on the Dove bars in the United States. It has this lovely creamy milky texture, and it's sold under the Galaxy brand name in Ireland, the UK, and in the Isle of Man, and I think also in places like India and Pakistan. I think in the rest of the world it's called Dove. So you can still get Galaxy bars in the US, so fear not. And this is really going to hurt a lot of these Irish shops over there, because the Irish grocery stores in the US sell vast amounts of Cadbury's chocolate, not just to Irish people who live in America, but also many Americans go to these Irish shops because of the range they have of foreign chocolates. And this is going to really damage these small businesses, and they're all small family businesses. So well done, Hershey's, you bleeding Nazis, for banning chocolate from America and just making life that little bit more crap. I remember back in 2008 when Obama was running for election and all these people were going, Dane, he'll save us, oh my God, Obama. And remember that song they had, the TV ad where the little girl was going, he's going to change it and rearrange it, Obama's going to save the world, or however it went. I could just see those people today still trying to justify it, and they're going, Obama, he's going to change it. He's going to change it. Well, the same thing is happening. We saw that happen with Russell Brand. People have this desire to believe that the control system cares about them, and actually things that do happen in the bigger picture, the macro level, really is when the good guys win now and again. So this week we have this election in Greece, and of course the same people who are going, he's going to change it and rearrange it, Obama, and we're going, Russ will save us, he's here to save us. Well, this week they're all doing the same thing with the Greek revolution. 99% of them haven't got a clue what's going on in Greece, but they love those memes on Facebook, or those memes flying around. They think that teaches them all they need to know, because they're in search of proof. Anyway, here's some truth as opposed to proof. I'm looking at the groups which comprise this new Greek party, and there's even a Rosa Luxemburg tribute party. When you look at the list, it's incredible. Let me read it for you. Active Citizens, a Democratic Socialism and Patriotism. So they sound like National Socialists. Anti-Capitalist Political Group, Communism and Trotskyism. Citizens Association of Riga, Patriotism, Internationalism, Democracy, Ecology, Social Justice. So they sound like National Socialists. Communism Organization of Greece, Maoism. Oh my God, Communism. So they're Communist Platform of Communist Platform, Greek section of the International Marxist Tendency, Communism, Trotskyism. Democratic Social Movement, left-wing nationalism, socialism and Euroscepticism. Eco-Socialist of Greece, Eco-Socialism, Green Politics, that's, watermelons again. International Workers Left. It's like 1919 again. Revolutionary Socialism, Communism, Trotskyism. Movement for the United in Action Left, KEDA, Communism. New Fighter, well, they sound like a nice bunch. Democratic Socialism, Social Democracy. Radical Left Group Rosa, Luxemburgism. They probably finish the party every night of being thrown in the river. Radicals, Democratic Socialism and Patriotism. Reds, Communism and Trotskyism. Renewing Communism, Ecological Left. This is almost like a joke. It's almost like a really bad night in a student uni bar back in the 1970s. Renewing Communist, Ecological Left. Democratic Socialism, Eurocommunism, Green Politics, of course. Synaposismos, Democratic Socialism, Eco-Socialism, Eurocommunism, Environmentalism, and of course Feminism. Union of the Democratic Centre, Radicalism, Social Liberalism, Unitary Movement, Democratic Socialism, Social Democracy, and a number of independent leftist activists. So it's a hardcore Trotskyite left-wing group with extreme, I have to say, at the very top, National Socialist tendency. So it's basically what was elected into Germany in 1933, by the National Socialist Workers Democratic Workers Party, which was a collective of nationalist Germans coupled with international socialists. That's why Hitler always was and always will be a socialist, an international socialist. That's why they had National Socialists, But also, this one has a strong Maoist and Trotskyite aspect to it. Oh, it's setting it up for some, major. We're being set up here for for the balkanization of this part of the world. As I wonder how all these Greek lefties all feel that. There was Karl referred to people in the Balkans as ethnic trash. That's how he felt about them. So anyway, Lord Victor Rothschild and his Cambridge KGB spy ring must be absolutely, coming in their coffins, because this couldn't be a better result for them. A hardcore Trotskyite political party with a surprisingly high level of nationalism, social nationalism swing to it. So it really is the Greek version of the Social Democratic and Workers' Party. And of course, Russell Brand, who doesn't vote for anyone, has said he will vote for these guys because he's a moron, and his mesmerised morons following him will all follow him into the abyss. And this is an early part of the day. This is an early part of the game and in the platform of the grand chessboard. I suspect they're going to try and tear Greece asunder now from the inside with extreme left and right wing, which is the same thing at the end of the day. And in the background, the bankers and the globalists will just sit there and wait their time, and they'll get everything in the end. So those of you who are like with your eyeballs hanging out of your head and walking around going, "Oh, Greece has shown the way, the Greek Revolution is here," you really, really need to stop looking at those memes, and you really need to start researching. And this what's going on in Greece is basically a throwback to 100 years ago. There's nothing new about it at all. And those of you who said to me, "Oh, well, it's a bit of a change," I have to say that is Obama, 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 Obama. Speaking of the Greek elections, I'm really surprised that Sinead O'Connor hasn't called a press conference yet and sit there to give us her announcement and opinions of what's happening in Greece, while telling us that she was thrown down the well when she was 14 years old for wearing makeup in Corfu while she was in the Magdalen laundries at the same time. Yeah, I'm surprised she hasn't. You want to hear my Sinead O'Connor impression? Famine, Ireland, Catholic Church, feminism.
I'm coming apart! Oh, Mother of God, I'm coming apart!
28 days after the Lutz family moved into their dream house, they were running for their lives. What happened to them is an experience in terror you will never forget, and you will believe in the Amityville Horror. From the best-selling book that made millions believe in the unbelievable, the Amityville Horror.
So let's take the Marlin 336, loaded with 5 of Remington's 170 grain soft points, and let's see if we can make them jump. And we did make them jump.
And what you just heard after a segment of the original trailer soundtrack for the Amityville Horror movie was the sound of a Marlin 336 deer rifle being fired off. A rifle that fired 6 shots in a quiet neighbourhood on the south shore of Long Island, and none of the neighbours heard the shots, or so they claim. I've been very interested in this Amityville horror story for many years now. I've visited the site, and you really do have to visit the site. Luckily, I've seen the house before it was remodeled, and it still had the original facade that looked like 2 eyes. Those windows have now been replaced with square windows. But you have to go there to feel the energy of the place. There's something seriously not right in that area. Now, any of you have listened to my previous series at the Velocity of Now on Type 1 Radio, I think one of the later issues I spoke about my experience in Amityville, and I was still trying to work my way through it, and when that show ended and what they did that special on it, I decided to start looking into the case again, especially as now I know more things about social engineering, cults and military programs, and more I'm convinced that the Amityville story is a lot deeper and darker and more profound than we've been told. Was the house haunted? That's what everyone wondered about the 3-story shingled Dutch colonial house at Amityville on Long Island. And if ghosts had the right to walk anywhere, it was in this house, which until November 1974 was the home of a garage service manager, Ronald DeFeo Sr. and his family. But all that changed on Wednesday, November 13th, 6:27 p.m, with a phone call to the police. "Help! Help me! My family's dead! Murdered!" said a man's voice. "Who's that speaking?" asked the off-duty officer. "My name is Ronald DeFeo Jr., said the caller. He sounded shaky and excited. "My home is 112 Ocean Avenue. I'll go right there and wait for you." An alert went out and the police car manned by patrolman Kenneth Gruszewski proceeded to that address to investigate the report. The scene in less than 2 minutes. As he started up the driveway to the front door, he noticed a collection of miniature plaster figurines on the lawn, and this becomes very significant to the story. They consisted of replicas of St. Anthony holding a child in his arms, surrounded by 3 girls kneeling in prayer. At the door, Gruszewski was met by a well-built young man with a beard. "I made the call to the police," he said. "I'm Ronald DeFeo. What happened? My mother, my father, my brothers and my sister, they're all dead. Somebody killed them in their rooms." 23-year-old DeFeo led Gruszewski into the house and up the red carpeted circular staircase to the first floor. Just beyond the landing, he took the police through the open door into the master bedroom. The lights were all shining brightly. Gruszewski saw a man and woman lying face down in a king-size bed. They were dressed in their nightclothes, the man in blue flowered pyjamas, the woman in a pink negligee. Both were obviously dead. But what startled the policeman even more than the sight of the 2 bodies was the positions of their hands. They were clasped behind their heads. Now, they were lying face down. The police report would show that the victims in the master bedroom were DeFeo's 43-year-old father, Ronald DeFeo Sr., and his wife, Louise, 42. After confirming that the couple were dead, Gruszewski asked their son, "Where are the others?" "I'll show you," DeFeo replied, leading the officers out of the room and for a short distance down the hall to another open door. As the policeman entered this room, he saw 2 more bodies, each lying on one of the twin beds. These victims also had their hands clasped behind their heads. They turned out to be the youngest members of the DeFeo family, 9-year-old John Matthew and Mark, aged 11. They too were dead. "Is that it?" Gruszewski asked their buddy as he eyed the grisly scene. "No, there are 2 more. DeFeo led the policeman into the next room and showed him his sister Alison, 14, who lay face down on her bed with her hands also clasped behind her head. She was also dead. "Where's the other one?" the policeman inquired. DeFeo walked out of the room upstairs into the second floor. Gruszewski followed and was shown into another bedroom. There lay DeFeo's 18-year-old sister Dawn. Like the other victims, she lay dead on her bed with her hands folded behind her head. Face down on the bed, all of them with the hands clasped behind the head. Gruszewski hurried downstairs into the kitchen and phoned the police station. 6 DOAs, he reported to the duty officer. They were all murdered. Although the Amityville police maintained law and order in their community, they were not geared for handling homicide cases. These were investigated by the Suffolk County Police. Now, Suffolk County is the county where the town of Amityville is located. I'll talk a bit more geography later on in this report. Call to homicide brought half a dozen detectives headed by Lieutenant Thomas Richmond. As they went from room to room in the house, they were stunned by the similarities in the positions of the bodies. Their immediate reaction was that this could be a gangland murder or some sort of macabre ritual-type killing. None of the detectives had seen anything remotely like it. While Lieutenant Richmond took Gruszewski aside and asked him for a rundown on the circumstances under which he found the bodies, young DeFeo sat in the living room giving background information on his family and himself to the other detectives. As he spoke to the investigators, a large white sheepdog sat quietly at the end of the room. Gruszewski told Richmond how he had met at the door by Ronald DeFeo and taken upstairs to each of the bedrooms to view the bodies. You say the kid came home, found the bodies, then went to a gin mill or pub to call the police, Richmond asked. That's what my duty officer told me, and that's what DeFeo said, Grzuski replied. What the hell was wrong with using one of the house phones, Richmond demanded. And where is this gin mill? It's about a block and a half away, down on Merrick Avenue. It's called Henry's. Now, this was the first thing that set it off for me. Why did Ronald DeFeo Jr. not call from the phones in the house? If he was in a state of panic, there were several phones next door, including the one on the island property. That was the name of the family, Ireland. I've actually met the guy. I'll talk about him later on. He's an interesting character. You heard at the beginning of this report what a Marlin 336 rifle sounds like. So they heard nothing to neighbours, and not one of them answered the door to let him in. He went down to a pub, Merrick Avenue, where it turns into Montauk Highway. Richmond turned to his men and he said, take a run down there and check out the story he directed. And while you're on your way, count the number of houses between here and the tavern. I want to know how many other phones young Ronnie passed up in the biggest crisis of his life. Meanwhile, Dr. Howard Edelman, the medical examiner, was studying each of the bodies before moving them to the morgue for post-mortems. His findings indicated that Mr. and Mrs. DeFeo had each been shot twice in the back, while John, Matthew and Mark were each shot in the back. Alison and Dawn were killed by single bullets to the back of the head. So the two girls were shot differently. They were shot in the back of the head. It appears that they were all asleep when they were killed. Following the post-mortems, which was more or less bore out the findings of the scene, Dr. Edelman set the times of death between 10 p.m. and midnight on Tuesday, November 12th. So those 6 shots were fired off just before midnight, and none of the neighbours in this quiet, sleepy neighbourhood heard it. What makes this even more interesting is the fact that the street is a quiet street, and behind it is a canal or a riverway or a channel that leads to the ocean. It's perfectly quiet, and yet nobody heard an incredibly loud deer rifle go off just before midnight in this quiet neighbourhood. Meanwhile, Richmond was eliciting a few more facts from the only surviving member of the murdered family. DeFeo said he'd woken up about 7 a.m. on the Wednesday morning and had gone to work at Brigante Carl Buick, the Brooklyn garage where his father was service manager and young Ronald was a mechanic. The car dealership was owned by the senior DeFeo father-in-law, Richmond learned. The lieutenant asked DeFeo about his activities for the last 24 hours. DeFeo started with Tuesday when he said he went to work with his father. It was usual for them to leave in the morning and drive together to the garage. They would also return home in the evening. But after driving back home with his father on Tuesday evening, DeFeo explained, he went out again and didn't return until very late. He went straight to bed, and the next morning he drove to work without his father. You see, this is the thing with DeFeo. I don't think DeFeo even remembers what happened, because over the years and ever since then, he's constantly changed his story. This story didn't satisfy Richmond, so he wanted some other questions answered before broadening the investigation. He assigned 2 detectives to drive the 37 miles to Coney Island, Brooklyn, to interview the workers at Brigante Carl Buick for information on the elder DeFeo and his son. Richmond also wanted neighbours to be questioned about the family's characters and habits. This is the first thing I would have done as well. The investigation was not many hours old before the detective learned that the slain Ronald DeFeo Sr. was the nephew of Peter DeFeo, a 72-year-old reputed capo in the Vito Genovese crime family, mafia in other words. There was only the slightest suspicion that the deaths of Ronald DeFeo, his wife, 2 sons and 2 daughters were the work of the underworld. In fact, there's nothing at all to connect the DeFeo murders to the mafia, and it had nothing to do with racism. The fact that they were Italian Americans, it was automatic that assumption was already made. In general practice anyway, the mob members never kill family. It just doesn't happen, and the killings don't take place killing the homes. How the Cosa Nostra, what they normally do is the mob will inform a member that he has been masked for debt, tells him the reason why, and then kills him away from home. Nevertheless, police were not overlooking any possibility. Ronald DeFeo Sr.'s past, however, was as clean as a whistle, for despite his relationship to Peter DeFeo, the nephew's closest friends had been a prominent policeman. This is actually very common in New York. You'll have families where one side might be in the mafia and other sides might be in the police. It doesn't mean there's corruption going on. It's just how it is. The mafia are very secretive. They're like Freemasons, and just because one person in the family may be in the mafia doesn't mean that it affects the rest of the family. Moreover, the slain DeFeo and his father-in-law Brigante were active in many of the affairs of the Policemen's Association. DeFeo frequently attended their convention, while Brigante often bought tables for his family at their dinner dances. Many policemen bought cars and had them serviced at Brigante Carl Buick. In contrast, young Ronald DeFeo had several brushes with the law, found that he had a record of arrests that included narcotics. More recently, in October, a month before the murders, Ronald had been given, and this is significant, $23,000 of the firm's money to deposit in a bank. But he returned to the Buick agency showroom to report that he'd been held up in the street and robbed of the cash and checks. The father hadn't believed him, naturally, and harassed the son relentlessly to return the deposit, but Ronald insisted that he didn't have it and stuck to his story of the robbery. In the midst of the tension caused by the almost nightly arguments between father and son at the home, the elder DeFeo bought Ronald's sister Dawn a car. The investigation showed that Ronald was further incensed over that, since he had been after his father to get him a car of his own. Richmond and his detectives could not tie the son to the killings, but he was by the time the prime suspect because of the several key discoveries made in the early hours of the investigation. One of these was the .35 caliber Marlin rifle, part of the family collection, which was now missing. The other was a .22 caliber rifle and a double-barrel shotgun and a pellet gun were in their racks, but the Marlin was not, and the young DeFeo could not explain what had happened to it. Since no death weapon had been found in the house to search the grounds, Richmond and the detectives suspected that the Marlin was used in the killing. Their suspicions would later be confirmed by ballistics experts who recovered the bullets from the mattresses and identified them as .35 caliber rifle slugs, so they were definitely shot in their beds. By then, Ronald DeFeo had undergone 4 hours of continuous questioning at the house, and when detectives found themselves getting few answers to their satisfaction, it was decided to bring the young man to the Homicide Squad's offices in Hopeg for further investigation. Meanwhile, the detectives Richmond had sent out to Henry's Tavern returned. They had counted 24 houses between DeFeo's residence and the gin mill, any one of which Ronald could have stopped at to phone the police, but also uncovered a goldmine of information that supported Richmond's early suspicion of the son. In questioning a number of persons at Henry's, detectives found that DeFeo had been at the bar the previous Monday evening and had made inquiries among some of his drinking companions about where he could get a silencer for the Marlin. That information seemed to provide an answer to the question that Richmond and the other detectives had been asking from the beginning of their own investigation. How was it possible to shoot 6 people, one at a time, in a single household and not rouse one of them from their sleep? I'll tell you why. Because something was being done to that family in that house, and almost certainly there was some kind of psyop, black operations going on that was connected to a cult of which DeFeo and possibly his sister Dawn were members. It's most incredible when you think about it, Dr. Aldman said. The noise of the rifle, like a Marlin, certainly should have awakened some of the others in the house. Obviously it hadn't, so from the start detectives speculated on 3 theories of how the 6 were killed. 1, the killer had a silencer on the rifle. Not true. There was more than one killer, possibly. The family was drugged. Well, they weren't drugged, but I can tell you something, they were definitely anaesthetized. Detectives from the Suffolk County police scientific investigation unit found the remains of a beef stew in the refrigerator. Young DeFeo confirmed that it was the last meal the mother had served the family for their Tuesday dinner. The stew was taken to the police laboratory for analysis. The test of the subsequent toxicological studies of the contents of the victim's study showed no traces of any drug that might have employed a tranquilizer. So that left the first two possibilities: that the family had been shot by a killer who used a silence on a rifle, which he didn't, and that had been accompanied and held the other victims and pinned them in their rooms while the slayer went about executing the DeFeos one by one. They would have had needed at least 6 other people to be with Ron DeFeo to do this. It's possible. Where the 6 other people? Neighbours in one of those 24 houses that heard nothing. And did Ron DeFeo, by going to the bar instead of going to a house of a neighbour, not want to implicate? At 6:27 p.m. on November 14th, exactly 24 hours to the minute after the initial call to the police, Ronald DeFeo was formally booked on 6 charges of murder. The next morning, he was remanded at Suffolk County Jail in Riverhead. The court ordered a psychiatric examination. Meanwhile, on November 18th, a Suffolk County grand jury returned a murder indictment against him. Some weeks later, the psychiatrist found Ronald DeFeo competent to stand trial. This was held before Justice Thomas N. Sark in the latter part of 1975 in Riverhead, the Suffolk County seat. Assistant District Attorney Gerald Sullivan, a tough, hard-nosed prosecutor, quickly set the stage for combat with the defence by putting the former friend of DeFeo, Frank Davidge, on the witness stand. Davidge said that he'd been a close friend at one time and told how he and Ronald DeFeo double-dated on an occasion in the summer of 1972. When the evening was coming to a close, DeFeo got out of the car to escort his date to the door, but before he reached there, he rushed back to his car, pulled a rifle from under the front seat and pointed it at his date's head. Davidge testified that he jumped out of the car and intervened. When he asked DeFeo why he had acted so strangely, his friend could give no reason. Again, in that year, DeFeo and his friend went hunting in the woods. Davidge said he'd caught a glimpse of DeFeo aiming at him. I dodged behind a tree just in time to avoid being hit by 3 shots. Again, there was no explanation. In the spring of 1973, Davidge said his friend grabbed a shotgun off the wall of the bedroom and without provocation fired at Davidge's head twice. The gun misfired and Davidge was lucky to be alive. Said this ended his friendship with DeFeo. Now this is a strange story. Wouldn't he have ended the friendship with DeFeo the first time when he pulled the gun on the girl? But he waits to be shot at 2 more times before he breaks up the friendship. When Ronald DeFeo took the witness, and that was never fully explored if this guy was telling the truth either. When Ronald DeFeo took the witness stand, he at first protested his innocence. He said that he didn't believe that he was guilty when he signed the statements and made oral confession to detectives after the bodies were discovered. What does that sound like? It sounds like Sirhan Sirhan. He was then shown photos of the murdered mother and brother Mark. Do you know who these people are? Defence counsel William Weber asked. I never saw them before in my life, DeFeo replied. Did you kill your mother? Did you kill Mark? I'm not guilty as charged, DeFeo answered. Shown a photo of his father on his deathbed, DeFeo again denied knowing who it was. But then Weber said, did you kill your father? I killed him in self-defence, DeFeo replied. Did you have any help? Justice Stark interposed. No, DeFeo answered. I did it alone. Earlier testimony had depicted the accused as a violent character who couldn't get along with anyone in school or in the job, and DeFeo himself now sketched a picture of constant hostility, bickering and physical abuse in their home. When DeFeo was 12, he was said to have been expelled from school in Brooklyn and went home to tell his parents. His father became very angry. That's not really that strange to be expelled from school. You see, we don't know if this is true. This is this kind of psychohistory thing where someone says this and a psychiatrist overlays a story. Oh, he's sick, but we don't know if this is true. From the witness stand, DeFeo painted a self-portrait of aggression against authority. Well, that's pretty normal for young people. DeFeo has changed these stories constantly in the years since, so do not take these statements in the court as literal facts. DeFeo told the court one of the hairiest encounters occurred a year before the family was murdered. According to the defendant, I heard my parents fighting in their bedroom. My mother was screaming for help. My sister Dawn came running up into the room to get me to break it up. I refused, but Dawn wouldn't stop pleading. Daddy's killing Mommy, she cried. You've got to help. I then took the 12-gauge shotgun off the wall in my room and went into my parents' bedroom. I found my mother lying on the floor and my father standing over her. Listen, you fat bastard, he said. Get off that woman or I'll kill you now. He froze. I pulled the trigger once, clicked again. It didn't go off. Now this next part is extremely significant. The father then proclaimed that God had wrought a miracle, that the Lord was behind me, and he made an entire family hang religious pictures throughout the house and had statues placed outside on the front and back lawns. This is true. The house was covered in these religious statues of the Virgin Mary and Saint Anthony and Saint Francis, and the house's interior was covered in Catholic icons. A year later, however, divine providence had failed to intervene when young Ronald set about wiping the family of 6 out. I believe at this point something was happening with this family. There was something not right here. A whole family does not go insane in this manner unless there's some kind of exterior environmental, shall we say, influence happening on it. It just doesn't happen. A year later, however, divine providence had failed to intervene and young Ronald set about killing his family of 6. In the closing argument, defence attorney Weber asked the jury, what more proof of a diseased mind can there be than Ronald DeFeo Jr. being charged with the killing of his own family? Anybody to do this would have to be a diseased mind, has to be sick. DeFeo, by admitting the killings on the witness stand, has given up the possibility of freedom for the certainty of this everlasting confinement, whether it is just a mental institution or a jail. Prosecutor Sullivan encountered, there's no question that something is wrong with Ronnie. Normal people don't kill each other over people. They certainly don't kill 6 people. The cold, calm, deliberate way in which he carried out the murders, that's because he was in a trance, were carried out proves that DeFeo wasn't acting in the heat of passion or acting under extreme emotional disturbance. He selected time to kill the family members as they slept in their beds under the darkness of night. There sits an abnormal person, all right, but his disorder is in having an antisocial personality. That was what they used to call psychopathy, not a psychosis. Sullivan told the jury that DeFeo retrieved the shell casings after he triggered the bullets into his family. He had to dip into a pool of his sister's blood to get one of them. He took the casings as well as the clothing he had been wearing, some of it bloodstained, and disposed of everything in the bay off Amityville. This was dead easy because behind DeFeo's house, this Amityville house, is a dock. The back garden of the house goes onto a canal that seawater comes in. It's a channel. It's a boating area. It's where people who live in those houses can park their boats. It's actually quite beautiful. This was a planned systematic act to separate himself from the crime. He knew what he had done was wrong. After 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict on each of the 6 murder counts. On the 4th of December 1975, Justice Stark imposed 6 consecutive prison sentences of 25 years to life, a maximum prison imprisonment of 150 years. In doing so, he called the massacre the most heinous and abhorrent known onto Long Island. I am ordering the maximum jail term because I am of the belief that it represents a clear danger to others. That is, he may well kill again. Yet after Ronald DeFeo was removed from society, the story of the massacre took a new and incredible twist and incredible dimensions. The house was bought by George Lutz, a surveyor who settled in with his wife Kathy and their children, but not for long. Moving out less than a month later, they claim strange forces were causing them to depart for California. Jay Anson's The Amityville Horror, a book devoted to the Lutz's experiences in the house, where 6 had been slain, told of a green slime oozing through the keyholes and a mysterious creaking in the floorboards, the bodies levitating 6 feet from the floor. The account was debunked by a psychic research group's Amityville Village Historical Society, the DeFeo's former neighbours, and the subsequent occupants of the house. But 5 million copies of the book were sold on the basis of a popular film. Both appealed to those who preferred to believe that the dead, though they were the DeFeos, would not lie down. The book was exposed as a sheer fantasy. As a witness, it cited a policeman who didn't exist. It described psychic researchers investigating the phenomena, whereas none had actually gone near the place. But that didn't stop the self-styled witches, Satan worshippers, and assorted weirdos from descending on the house. Now, that's the background of the DeFeo stories. That's the only thing about the entire Amityville fiasco, should we say, that I can actually pin anything down on and say it's true. I don't for a minute believe the Lutz experienced any of the things they said they did in the book. I believe that was a cover story. At the beginning I played a segment from the original trailer, and it says, "You will believe the Amityville horror." That's because I believe, high probability, that some kind of military psyop was being placed on that family and taking place in the area, and Ronald DeFeo may have been a member of a cult, and all these cults are all connected to the intelligence services. Firstly, let's look at the house itself. The house itself was built on a property belonging to a family called Ireland. The guy Ireland is still there to this day, as are the family. They are a very strange bunch. They are almost the neighbourhood watch. They parade around like generals defending their turf. The neighbours don't seem particularly friendly. It's all very close. It gives you the same kind of vibe you would get in a sort of a Hasidic neighbourhood, a Mormon neighbourhood, any kind of religious cult neighbourhood. It has that vibe to it. The house itself backs onto, as I said, a river. The fact that the whole DeFeo family went essentially crazy when they entered into this house shows that something was going on in there. Something was being fired at the house. The toxicology report said that they were not poisoned, but they could have been hearing sounds. They could have been receiving subliminal messages. It can be done. It's been known for years. How would they access the house? Very simply, they could. The military could either have moved into a house across the river, across the channel, and beamed the signals from there, or they could have put a boat in the back, a boat in the channel. It could have been done from there too. The neighbours had to have known something was going on. The fact that they were testing them, the whole thing of the shotgun and the children and the statues being put in the yard, these were almost like control methods to see how it was going. Now, let's talk about Long Island. I know Long Island very, very well. It's a very, very strange place. It is the centre of, as I spoke earlier on the show, when you have these things going on, these psyops, there's nearly always cults involved, and then you have a wilderness area next to a heavy urban area. On Long Island, you have places like the Brookhaven Laboratories, which is much more sinister and much more strange in terms of human experimentation than you get at the Montauk. See, the Montauk one is blown out of proportion to take your eye off Brookhaven. You've also got the weapons manufacturer Grumman, which is right nearby, and of course the Wardenclyffe Research Centre, where Tesla built his famous tower. Long Island is filled with this kind of thing. It's close to New York City. Now, where's the wilderness? The sea. The sea is the wilderness next to it. There's always been stories out there, all going back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, of cults and weird ritual killings and slayings, and always connected to a cult, and always never far from a military installation. Now, as I had spoken about the Pont Saint-Esprit poisoning story earlier on in the show, don't give me this thing, they wouldn't do this in a neighbourhood. They do these things to a neighbourhood. I believe the horror story itself, more and more, was created as a distraction from what really caused DeFeo to... I don't think DeFeo should have been found guilty. He was not in his right mind. It was just like Sirhan Sirhan. He cannot recall anything. His story has changed over the years. The only way that family was shot is there was somebody helping him. Were they neighbours? I don't know. Were they neighbours in the cult? I don't know. Or they were receiving some kind of subliminal instructions to make them lie down on the bed in that position while he killed them. The most fishy aspect of all is the fact that the neighbours did not hear the Marlin 336 rifle going off. That's impossible. You would have heard that on the other side of the channel, which is about 100 yards away behind the house. And that the house is quite close, very close nearby, in a quiet, leafy area with no busy traffic or anything. You could hear anything in those neighbourhoods. Did not hear the 6 shots. Either they're lying for a reason, or they're somehow involved, or something was done to them to make them not hear them. The bodies were not shot somewhere else and brought there. George and Kathy Lutz are two of the most untrustworthy individuals. I believe that they were actually paid to go in there, and the fact it was only 28 days, it was like a 28-day job to create a spooky ghost story about this place in order to take the focus off what really happened wrong the Feo. They wanted the public to believe that there was this nonsense story that there was an Indian burial ground where a chief was buried, or there was even a rumour of a Satanist who had escaped from Massachusetts 200 years ago and lived there doing satanic rituals. It was all done to stop people asking questions about the strangeness of the murder. So therefore, the house is haunted by demons or Indian spirits, and that's what happened. That explains everything. Good night. Doesn't explain anything. Now, George Lutz's son has a Facebook page. He's claiming now that his father did black magic rituals in the house. Nothing of the sort. He gives no proof. He just says it. So he's keeping the mythology going of the family that experienced demonic stuff at this house. The only Amityville horror that actually happened was the murder of those people. But the only ghosts that set foot in it were either the military or the CIA, in collusion with a cult. Ronald DeFeo Jr. would have been prime target for recruitment. The fact that he stole $23,000 in cash from his father, that money would have went to the cult. What do the cults need? They need money more than anything else to keep their operations going. And as I says, Long Island is a spooky place. That Satan worshipping house I told you about in the Velocity of Now last year is in the next town of Massapequa. I know the whole area very, very well. Why were the Feos targeted? Who knows? Any reason. The intelligence services will pick anyone. They probably guided them towards this house in this neighbourhood. They knew the neighbours were somehow involved. I think I'd love to know who the neighbours of this family were. I would imagine that large numbers of them moved out of Amityville not long after the murders and were never heard of ever again. So that's my closing theory for this. That the Amityville horror does not exist, that there are no ghosts, that the photograph of the little boy that appeared in the negative they said nobody could get in could have easily been placed in there. That could have easily been placed on there. And also add to that would feed into the whole mythology of the place being a place of demonic, ghosts and evil. It's all nonsense. What the real demons were the intelligence services in collusion with a cult who were behind the DeFeo murders, and one day the truth will come out. Those 6 shots were heard by lots of people until we find out who heard them, who they are, and why they said they didn't hear them, and why their houses were missed when Ronald DeFeo went to make that phone call. Until we know all this information, we'll never know the truth of what really went on. Thanks very much for listening to this pre-recorded show of the Velocity of Now, and I'll be back with a regular live show this time next week, and feck 'em if they can't take a joke.